So let's talk about the bolter-wielding battle line of the Primaris, and look at what the standard Space Marine infantry can bring to the table in 10th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd focus on your standard issue battle line Intercessor, the primary troops choice of the faction. In the video let's talk briefly about their models, then go through their datasheet, synergies, and how I think about using them in game. In the lore, the Space Marine Intercessors are basically the Primaris battle line, kind of taking over from the tactical squad of the Firstborn in their own way, though without any heavy or special weapons. While the Space Marines can deploy all manner of fancy and specialised equipment, the standard Marine with a bolt rifle is still more than enough of a force to be reckoned with, tending to be the most commonly seen Space Marines in the lore, generally seen fighting on the battle line and engaging and destroying enemy infantry, with enormous bolt guns with their characteristic exploding shells, though still having all the power of an Astartes if they happen to get to grips with the enemy in melee of course. There's plenty of variants of Intercessors, which generally comes from the word to intercede, meaning to intervene on the behalf of another, stepping up and holding the line in ceramite armour I guess. Models wise, the current kit from Games Workshop's £40, €51 or $62, 2.6 points per dollar, which isn't too bad for Space Marines as Games Workshop go. In general, any 10-man boxes of Marines tend to do okay on the tabletop for feeling of value, at least compared with some of the other Warhammer out there, and given that they're a kind of ubiquitous model, you can find them in plenty of discount sets out there. They're currently in both the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves Combat Patrol box sets, and they've been discounted in all sorts of forms in the past, and you often might get a bit of luck being able to pick them up second hand off eBay. I feel like the models are well enough light as standard issue Space Marine troops, nothing really too fancy though you wouldn't really expect them to be, can be a bit of a blank canvas to put a bunch of chapter specific upgrades on. In terms of customization, you have the option to equip the bolt rifles as auto bolt rifles or stalker bolt rifles and things, though perhaps mercifully they now don't have in-game impact, which always felt a little bit arbitrary and fiddly to me. They do have a grenade launcher, which is certainly worth taking, though their Sergeant War gear doesn't build everything that they can equip on their datasheet, so you might have to raid the bits box for some fancy power weapons on that. As ever with picking up Warhammer kits, if you were buying new ones, then feel free to check out the links in the video description for a good saving on Warhammer versus Games Workshop's web store. Games Workshop's official discount retailers can do anywhere between 10 and 20% off, depending on where you are around the world, and if you buy through any of these ones specifically, then a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics and the creation of other videos like this as well. Let's get onto their rules and datasheet though. And in 40k currently, your standard Intercessor squad is 80 points per 5 models. You can fill them in squad sizes of 5 or 10. The vast majority of people tend to go for 5s. They've got the standard issue Space Marine stat line, 2 wounds at toughness 4 with a 3+ save, a 6-inch move, and leadership 6. Durability is kind of okay for the cost really, though not really standout. The right sort of special weapons fire or heavy bolters and things tend to go through them pretty quickly, but they're not a pushover against small arms as well. The Intercessors get objective control too as battle line troops, so often if they are in a direct conflict over an objective with enemy models, they'll often win out because of that. For their weapons, their ranged weapons are the main focus, but they do get a reasonable sort of damage output in close combat, 3 attacks per model with just the regular guys, all at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, which is enough to bully lighter infantry, like say toughness 3 termagants or guardsmen. Even with just the base attacks, they'll account for around about 5 or so of those in a single round of melee. With the free war gear though, the Sergeant can upgrade to something fancier, so he certainly should, given this will make him far more threatening. And for the Intercessors, you don't even have to choose between swapping out the bolt rifle for something. He can still take his bolt rifle, and doesn't have to trade it out for a pistol, but then compare it with one of the Sergeant weapons, either a power sword, chain sword, power fist, or thunderhammer. In general, the most common of these that tend to get used are the power fist. 3 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2 just helps the squad deal with a bunch of targets they're not really that good against, particularly things like enemy Space Marine equivalents will wound, say, enemy Intercessors on a 2+ with good AP and kill them outright. The Thunderhammer will be my next best choice. It trades out hitting on a 3+ for devastating wounds. Against the right target that will be a little bit better but will often be worse. And the Power Sword isn't awful either for more attacks but only damage 1. Without war gear costs in 10th edition, in general the Power Fist does seem to be a bit of a no-brainer. The Melee Sergeant is quite a nice advantage over some of their competitor type units. Things like Heavy Intercessors and the Phobos squads and Infernus Marines don't get fancy war gear. Their range damage is their primary damage output though. Standard bolt rifles are pretty good at shredding enemy lighter infantry. They get 2 shots to 24 inches at strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, and they get the assault keyword so you can advance and shoot, and also the heavy keywords to hit on a 2+ if they're static. Both of those are quite nice advantages, probably the assault more than the heavy if anything really. Being able to go fast and still keep up the firepower is quite nice. On top of that, they can also take a grenade launcher in the unit, which you may as well, given that it's just completely free and doesn't compromise a bolt rifle. The frag mode can add a few more volume shots with blast if you fire against a horde, and the crack mode is actually really quite strong in terms of a shot to threaten, say, lighter vehicles or medium infantry or something. A single shot at strength 9, AP 2, damage D3. The only thing is that you won't be able to fire the grenade launcher if they're advancing around the table, as it doesn't have the assault keyword. The sergeant can take fancier pistols like hand flamers or plasma pistols, which aren't awful. To be honest though, I'd probably just stick with the bolt rifle there. It's just a bit better synergy with the rest of the squad and doesn't risk blowing him up like the plasma pistol does, which could be particularly painful if it takes out your power fist just before you charge. The single biggest thing that the Intercessors bring to the table, though, is their special rule called Objective Secured. This one's basically one of the sticky objective type rules if they happen to control a point in the command phase. It's definitely handy to have on an objective holding unit, potentially just towing onto your home field in the first turn, and then they could potentially move off it to go elsewhere if they wanted. Basically, the rule triggers in the command phase if you held the point, and then the point remains yours until the opponent can actually take it, so they actually have to have some units to get there and kind of scrub the flag that you've planted on it. It's also very nice to have on midfield points if they can survive a turn. Say if they were on an outlying objective that the opponent couldn't reach with movement, if they just gunned them down, the point is still going to be yours if you've been able to deploy this rule. Flipping back to their damage output, this is roughly what you can expect out of a unit of 5 of them. For this one, I'm assuming that you've got a grenade launcher, a bolt rifle on the sergeant, and a power fist. At range they do okay, but maybe not standout, around about 5 dead termagants or around about 1 dead enemy space marine, which isn't nothing, but it's not going to be much if they're just standing and shooting all game long. They certainly don't do much to terminators or vehicles. In melee, they again account for around about 5 termagants, and do a fair bit better against regular space marines thanks to that power fist, killing around about 2 of those on average, but still not really that much to anything tougher. In general, it just kind of underlines that range damage output alone isn't the main reason to bring these, though as mentioned they compete quite well with a fair few of the other space marine units on a pure damage sort of front, and they'll certainly make a mess if they are able to both shoot and then follow it up with a charge, killing around about 3 standard space marines or 10 horde targets, and that's definitely better than most with a few more threatening things in the squad. Overall, putting that all together, their main strengths are sticky objectives, high objective control, and better damage than the majority of their competitor units for small space marine nuisance interfering units. For the downsides, they won't really have that much damage output compared with your heavier hitters. Their defense is merely okay. After you've got one copy of their objective secured type rule, it's kind of diminishing returns after that, and being space marines with a million different flavours of infantry with small arms, they have a massive amount of competition for their battlefield role, and you might prefer one of the various other special rules or damage profiles out there. For supporting these guys, in general they aren't really going to want too much in the way of dedicated support for them. If you've got options like stratagems or characters that can go onto a unit, it may as well be your fighting elites that are massive threats. And instead only think about using stratagems and things situationally if it somehow mattered massively that they survive compared with other things around the board. As always, Oath of Moment could give them a small damage boost. Hitting on 3s, that'd be a 33% damage increase. It matters less if they're stationary with the bolt rifles, I suppose. And then for stratagems, I guess the most impactful is probably Armour of Contempt to try and have them survive on an objective to get that sticky objective rule on the go. If they're up close with something and they really want to try and take down something tougher, you could augment their damage with Grenade a bit. Between shooting, grenade and assault, they could take a surprising chunk out of something that's a bit tougher than them. Unless you just want something for themed reasons, I'd say in more optimised lists, characters and transports just aren't really worth it that much for your basic intercessors. As mentioned, if you've got limited resources, it makes sense to give these to the units that cost a lot more and are more threat. I'd say the best argument for character attachment is more when you just have a super valuable character that doesn't really care too much about what squad they join, and they just literally want a retinue for some bodies as they go about doing what they are doing. Maybe for those, Supreme Grandmaster Azrael of the Dark Angels could be an alright option. He can generate command points and then will make the unit unusually threatening after that. People tend to prefer fielding him with assault intercessors. If you go in for a cheap bodyguard, but regular ones could do fine, and they do have advantages with their ranged focus and their sticky objectives. And I feel like Chief Librarian Tigurius is an unusually good fit for the Ultramarines as well. He gives the squad -1 to hit, makes them far more dangerous with his psychic attacks, gets them free overwatch and some protection against psychic things too. and perhaps fits better with the regular Intercessors than most, given that he can't join Hellblasters, which might get more value out of his various buffs. The regular Intercessors would still be competing against Sternguard for his attention though. Otherwise, for more generic things, the first one I'd be most tempted by would be perhaps a Lieutenant for lethal hits and fallback and shoot and charge. Definitely wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but you'd probably want a 10-man squad to justify it. In general though, as mentioned, I feel like they're much better just kept cheap 5-man squads to skirmish over objectives and use their special rule well and not throw too many further points after them. For transports, if you really did want something, maybe an Impulsor could be okay. A 5-man squad in that could be an okay objective securing force, potentially firing a bunch of bolt rifles off the top, or just getting a lot of speed to deliver them onto a midfield objective, then do a bit of shooting and hopefully survive until next turn. I really don't think it's the worst formation in the world, though it isn't commonly something that people would use in competitive play. For detachment rules, as your standard issue Space Marines, they basically get something from pretty much every detachment. That has a bit of basic support acts to the main event. They won't generally be the focus of each list. Firestorm could give them strength 5 bolters up close, which doesn't hurt, and I guess they could always advance and shoot their grenade launcher here. Gladius could allow you to advance, shoot and charge with the assault doctrine on the go, so quite fast, and could do the shooting and then melee pretty reliable there. Reactive movement can be pretty powerful when you're on objectives as well though, maybe to have them jump to the other side of a ruin war and survive on an objective, and then use their special rule. Vanguard Spearhead makes them a bit tougher at range, could be okay if you're using them as backfield objective grabbing. Return to reserves and the shooting stratagem in theory could help, and I feel like if there's any detachment they're going to be the main event, it'd be the Anvil Siege Force. They're the ones with perhaps the best chance of making the bolt rifles more generally dangerous, given that they can get a +1 to wound if they're static. You could do the sort of sustained lethal hits combo with a lieutenant around as well, though it does depend on them surviving stationary in the open, which is maybe a little bit optimistic, though I guess if they're just basic intercessors and you're pushing forward with other scary stuff, there's at least a chance it might work out. I feel like people might be a bit tempted by heavy intercessors for that same role though. Otherwise they do get something from most other things. Ironstorm single rerolls are okay for grenade launchers or power fists. Stormlance could advance, shoot and charge once more. Even in first company they could use the reroll thing, though in reality I guess you're going to be fielding veterans in that one. Otherwise for chapter things, plenty of small benefits. As mentioned, the Codex chapters have got quite a few characters that can join them, but usually they're going to be better with other things. As mentioned, Tigurius could be a good fit if he's not going with Sternguard. Beyond that, Blood Angels could hit pretty savagely in melee, particularly in their Liberator group. Black Templars could get the 6+ feel no pain and some melee support, though in general I feel like they're going to be very tempted by their Crusader squads. Dark Angels could have some use for them with the Unforgiven Task Force, and they could bodyguard Azrael. And Space Wolves again could do feel no pain things, but again they may be likely to emphasise things like Assault Intercessors for melee if you're taking one of the standard troops. Overall, between all that, and as mentioned earlier, they do see occasional play in competitive lists, though I'd say that it's a little bit on the niche sort of side. The main issue, of course, is that Space Marine armies have a ridiculous amount of competition for standard guys in power armor that can deal with enemy infantry. They've got basically around about 10-ish units that broadly fit that kind of role, all balanced at least fairly well with their own pros and cons, and you can't take all of them. I feel like there's nothing too terrible around taking a few squads of them if you want to, though in most optimised lists they tend to just be a niche pick, and if so, almost certainly just a single unit of 5, as opposed to more than that. The main draw being one squad to start on your home objective and use the special rule, and then either hang around there if it makes sense to defend it against deep strike interlopers, or then push up rapidly towards one of the midfield objectives to try and deploy the objective secured on another one. You could definitely go for more squads than that, and particularly so if you're playing more casually than against hyper-optimised tournament lists and things though. I think it's more the case that you just wouldn't want too many Space Marine units that are just things that do objectives and fight against enemy infantry, as you can only really have so much of that takes away from your mainline damage dealers. For the things that most commonly tend to steal the Intercessor's thunder, Scouts for 65 points are often people's first go-to as a cheaper starters unit. Getting Infiltrate and their Return to Reserve things are pretty godly, and they're just all around efficient for trading on the midfield objectives. Infiltrators often tend to get the nod over Intercessors as a slightly more expensive backfield unit. Their deep strike denial can be absolutely huge in certain matchups, and if it's a choice between Intercessors and them for holding the backfield, they often tend to get played in place. As mentioned, Assault Intercessors can work really quite nicely with certain characters. Most characters tend to have good melee profiles, and their rerolls can make them even better, so are nice for things like Azrael as mentioned. Intercessors are some guys with slightly weaker bolters, but they can mark targets for gun lines, which is a nice advantage. And if you're going for cheap skirmishers moving forward, lots of people like the jump intercessors. The same points cost, but massively fast with a 12-inch move. Pretty similar or better damage profiles with that mortal wound impact hits, and they can deep strike as well to do secondary objectives, which is another pretty huge advantage. Between all that, maybe it's not too surprising that they do have a bit of rivalry for their battlefield role in game. To sum up though, if I were to put intercessors on the tabletop right now, I'd like to go for a 5-man squad and use them to mark the home field objective with their special rule as mentioned, go with max bolt rifles, take the grenade launcher, and take a power fist on the sergeant for squashing enemy Astartes, and then probably beyond that go pretty light on the support options in terms of stratagems and characters and things. Maybe the best rules that they get on with are the Anvil Siege Force, though that doesn't tend to get played very much in competitive. If absolutely trying to optimise a list, I'd certainly be considering versus the other Space Marine skirmish infantry you could take. Though I think there's easily enough room for a unit of one of them, even in optimised competitive lists, if you want to make them work. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the standard issue Primaris battle line though. What do you make of the Intercessors in 10th edition right now? Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.